First of all, it's an honor to be with you here today, an honor for all of us, especially with these change makers. I wrote a book called Spark about 12 years ago, which has led me all over the world trying to advocate to get exercise, play, and sport back into the schools. And I'm delighted that to be with the panel who are all change makers. One of the things that we find when we go to a school and begin to change the dynamics by getting exercise and play into the school on a regular basis for all kids, we see a bunch of things that happen. The first thing that we see happen is a drop in discipline problems. The second thing we see happen is a drop in absences. Kids come to school because they want to be engaged. The third thing that we see is an improvement in grades and in test scores. And the fourth thing is that they get healthier. They get physically healthier. That takes a little longer, but we see these things happen very quickly. And so with that introduction, I'd like to introduce three change makers, have them introduce themselves and tell us about what they're doing and what their work has been like.
Hi, my name is Liz Wolfson. I am the Chief Visionary Officer of the Girls Athletic Leadership Schools. We have 4 schools, 3 in Denver, 1 in Los Angeles, and we work off of John's book. I was so excited when I got the message that John was going to moderate the panel. We work off of brain science that says to learn, you got to move. And so we created schools with a positive gender focus, both girls, and now we have our first boys' school. And we spend our time in the realm of sweatpants and sneakers, which is the uniform to schools. And we just say that you can teach content through movement, that you can create cellular memory, that girls and boys can create self-efficacy because we surround movement with social, emotional, and relational supports. And it's just a place that looks like summer camp, but it's a school. And so as John said, the results of that, and there's lots of questions of what does that look like, but the results of that are higher test scores, equity-based schooling, which is a model that whether you can afford to go to a private school or you're homeless, you can have the same model of human development and human experience. And over 7 years, by having kids move, we create healthier lifestyles, we create healthier relationships, and we actually have fun in schools, which I think is the big disruption. So there's a lot to talk about how we do what we do, but we all do a format of that, but really pleased to be here and share the model with you.
My name is LaVal Brewer. I'm the executive director for Playworks. I work here in Southern California, but Playworks is an organization that for the past 20 years who've been using the power of play to leverage successful children in elementary schools. We believe that when children get out on the recess yard, yes, recess is a place where children play every day. They actually play more in recess than they do in PE. They play more in recess than they do in sport. They play every single day. We believe that when they have a successful recess that engages them in an ability to have inclusion and work with their teammates and get out of the classroom and have fun, the thing that kids do every single day, that reduces conflict on the playground in the recess time. It increases their physical activity during that time period, which is theoretically 30 minutes every day, 5 days a week, half of the daily recommended physical activity minutes we need for children. And it allows them to get into a place where children can be children in a very stressful environment. You know, children come out of the classroom and they've either just had a tough math lesson or science. They come out of the classroom where they're trying to figure things out and there's a very structured environment. And on many of our elementary schools around the country, they come out of that classroom into a space that they then need to navigate by themselves. I know you may be thinking, oh, I was on recess yard when I was a kid, and it wasn't so bad, or I was on the recess yard when I was a kid, and it was terrible. Well, the thing that we've learned is that when a child comes out of a classroom, whether it was when you were a child or today in elementary school, that what makes a successful recess, and what I mean by a successful recess is a child who is in a game, physically active, doing the things that children naturally want to do, is a caring, consistent adult. A person who is on that playground, who is welcoming them into that space and saying, I'm so happy for you to be here. We call that a coach in our Playworks schools. And those coaches create an environment to where inclusion is the norm. They create an environment where we say to children, we want you to try on this different activity, this different game, encouraging them to be into a game and a sport. And we create an environment of fun. A fun activity that kids can do and have a great time during the day. When that happens and they go into the playground and it is successful and it is fun and it is including and it is invigorating and it is challenging, they then go back in the classroom ready to learn. Now let's think about this. What do adults do every day that's kind of mandated by law, that we need to have a 15-minute break and we need to have a 30-minute lunch? Well, children need to have just as much play and just as much break. And I want to let you know that on some recesses around the country, that the No Child Left Behind legislation that said that education and learning was so important, that some schools said, where can we find more time to teach? So we took away recess time so that children could spend more time in the classroom. And in your book, Sparked, that just makes no sense. So what we're advocating across the country and across the world, actually, is let's let kids do what they do naturally. Let's let them get out and play. But let's create a space for children to get out and play in a way that is functional for them. So when I look at elementary schools and I look at school districts, the place that is not funded well, does not have the resources needed, is the recess yard. We want to change that.
My name is Jay Nanda. I'm the founder and executive director of Urban Dove. We've been doing sports-based youth development in the after-school world for about 20 years. But 6 years ago, we opened a school in Brooklyn called Urban Dove Team Charter School. And basically with the limited time we have, I think the simplest thing is to say we've created a school where playing a varsity sport is mandatory for every student in the school, boys and girls. Students come into our school, they get put on a team, single gender team, and they get assigned a full-time coach. And that coach is their coach in the traditional sense, literally coaches them on the basketball court or soccer field. But it's a full-time coach who's the first person they see in the morning, the last person they see at the end of the day, part guidance counselor, part mentor, part parent, part social worker. Every single student gets put on a team, and that team of about 15 to 20 students goes to class together. And every single day, for 2 to 3 hours a day, they play sports with their team and their coach. They practice, they play varsity games, they play intramural games, they play tournaments, they train in the weight room, they train in the cardio room. And the idea around it is if every single kid in high school was on a team, and every single kid, as being a part of that team, had both peers and athletes around them to support them, but more importantly, had a coach who was looking out for them, the way the varsity athletes in this country do, literally making sure they go to every single class, taking them to that classroom, and staying with them for the first 5 minutes to make sure they're in their seat and they're focused, coming to pick them up from that classroom and take them to their next classroom. I think every single student in high school would have the benefit that we see varsity athletes have across the country. They do better in school, they're less likely to use drugs, they graduate at higher rates, et cetera, et cetera. And in order to prove that this model can work, our school is only available to students who have gone to 9th and 10th grade in a previous high school and are dropping out. We're taking probably the lowest 10% of New York City public school high school student. They're overage and undercredited. The average 10th grader comes to our school doing math and reading on about a 5th grade level. We have over 40% of our students are students with disabilities. So it's an incredibly high-risk group of student, an incredibly innovative model about how to re-engage them and how to reconnect them. And we're having tremendous success. We have one school in Brooklyn, we're opening a second one in the Bronx. But the idea is really, what if every single kid in America, something to think about as you think about this conference, yes, the little kids need recess and the middle school kids need recess and play and PE is very important, but what if when you got to high school, it was mandatory, as it is in our school, in order to graduate, you must play a varsity sport. And not for 2 months over your 4 years, but every single day, every single year, you're in school. Could you get the same kind of results that we're getting for the .00 0.001% of kids who play varsity athletics right now? The answer seems to be yes. And we do it on a public school dollar. So this is not something that takes $10 million from a corporate sponsor for 50 kids to do. Potentially every high school in America could do this. And I think we need to start thinking about varsity athletics as not being an elitist kind of endeavor, but maybe it should be for everybody. And we're having great success, and hopefully we'll continue to have great success.
Let's make it real and talk about one particular kid that has profited from your programs. And I'll start by saying that there was an article out of Tampa, Florida, some years ago, where a second grader from a broken home was arrested for his second time driving himself to school. And he was asked, second time driving himself to school. Because his parents didn't get him there. And he was asked, why were you doing this? He said, well, I don't want to miss PE. So he was going on that day for sure. And I think that all of the programs that we're talking about excite the kids, get the kids there, keep them there, and make them want to be there. We started a program called Box that you'll hear about later from Kathleen Tully that gets the kids to come to school an hour before school, 3 to 5 days a week. And when we started, both in the inner city and in the suburbs, they have to come early to school, an hour, to play, vigorous play. That's what it was. And the first 1,800, we did this subjective analysis and asked them, would they want to do it again? Would they want to get up an hour earlier, 3 to 5 days a week, to come to school to play vigorously before school? And 96% of them wanted to do it again. So you think about that, the kids really want to get out there, want to move, and it generates a lot of excitement, interest, and they look at school very differently. So if you could each tell us about a person or a situation that's outstanding in your minds.
Sure. The first thing I would say is schools are incredibly complicated vehicles. We're not after-school programs, we're not before-school programs, we're not summer camps. The politics of education, you just have to open your newspaper, are incredible. And so for me, I do want to acknowledge that being a disruptor has also been the most character-building experience of my life, often one of the most humiliating experiences of my life, having to do this work. So what I think we all share in common is that what we do is integrated fully into a school. It's not a class. It's not an after-school program. It is trying to flip the notion of education on its head in order to change a system, not to create a program. Yeah. And I think that's what we share, so it's really important to make that distinction. Quick story, Katie Henderson, skinny little thing, came to us in 6th grade, no self-efficacy at all around the issue of her own intelligence, her own sense of physical space in the world, taking even away the gender issues of what we know about girls and taking space versus what we know about boys and the initial impulse to take space. But she came in 6th grade, clearly a young woman with brilliant mind, never in her life saw herself as anything but someone who could be blown over if you just went, she would just fall over, she was so wafy. By her 7th grade year, she decided she was going to run because she had to run as part of the school day. And so kids learning things around their bodies that basically say, if you have a body, you're an athlete, a known saying that we all know, but for kids is not something they relate to so easily, irrespective of background. And Katie joined the cross-country team, and by her 8th grade had won the entire league in cross-country, knew nothing about herself as an athlete. And then because the way that we all do things is integrating the lessons of the body, the lessons of cross-country, into her schoolwork, which are about her habit rubric and all those things that you teach about motivation and inspiration. Those are all lessons of the body. And she used that to apply to a high school. She became the star on their cross-country team. And it was just a beautiful piece. What you can't ever illustrate unless you're in this for Division I athletics, which none of us are. We will get that, but that's not what we're in it for. It became a part of Katie's personhood that she was allowed to take up space, that she knew how to run when she had to run, and she knew how to walk when it was time to walk. She knew how to get herself ready for big exams, and she knew how to get excited for a dance. All of that for her, as she explains in a lot of her testimonials, is the lessons of the body. And of course, it was part of her college application, and she ended up getting into Northwestern, which was never in sight for her to begin with. But simply because she believed in herself through lessons of the body that manifested through academics. So it's an easy piece. But you guys will have much more touching stories around this. I mean, the panel before, how can we beat that? And,
yeah, he was tough.
and so forth. But I think the point of the kids who choose to come to our schools is that it doesn't matter what your background is. We are all lacking for all of our children in using the lessons of the body as integrated into who we can be in the world. So that's our story.
Yeah, my story comes from a principal, Denise Bertrand. Denise, if you listen to this later, yes, I did say your name. Denise came up to me one day and said, I hear that you're going to try to reduce your basketball program because you want to continue to focus on recess and you're trying to think about this and that. And she said, you can't do that. You need to continue the basketball. I said, okay, well, why, Denise? What is it about the basketball that is so earth-shattering that I have to keep it? She says, well, I was at a game the other day, and one of my students, who's really smart and amazing, was balling down the court. Just balling down the court. I'm like, okay, great. She goes, she would never ball in school. I mean, she's this quiet kid who just is smart. And I saw something in here that said, she's an athlete. And I said, okay, great, that's awesome, we'll keep sport. We'll actually expand sport. She goes, so you're not gonna reduce sport? I said, no, we're not reducing sport. We're not gonna do that. Why would we do that? Giving girls the opportunity to be in a game that they wouldn't normally be in because basketball on a recess yard for a girl is not heard of, right? It just doesn't happen. Or soccer. So we have tons of elementary school kids. So, there are 2.9 million elementary school kids in Southern California, all of them engaging in recess. I think the thing that we all need to know about the one kid is, it's every kid. Every kid needs to have a successful recess so they can then get into sport and then have a healthy lifestyle forever.
I would say, I think I told this story last night at the dinner, we had a student who came to us, I think 0 credits, 16 years old when he came to us. His first year, he didn't do anything, didn't pass any classes with us. Was not really an athlete. He was on the basketball team, but didn't really like basketball that much. Second year, maybe passed a couple of classes, finally sort of got his act together in his third year. He was with us for 5 years, which is unusual, almost unheard of. It's a 3-year program where some kids need a 4th year. In his 5th year, he was turning 21, so he had to graduate that year, otherwise he'd have to leave the school. In about January, he got his final credits in Regents, graduated. It was sort of in the middle of the year, so we had like a little mini ceremony for him. His whole family was there, his mom, his cousins, and they did a family picture. And they were taking the picture, and the mom yelled, wait, coach, you got to get in this picture. And the coach who we had had for 5 years was sort of standing off on the side and got all teary-eyed, and literally that coach had become a part of their family. The number of times he had spoken, and the mom, I used to yell at you, and you'd yell at me, and we've been through some stuff. And I think that what that little moment taught us was that over time, you have this caring, consistent adult who's in this kid's life, and this kid was not an athlete. That's the thing you have to remember. We hear these cliche stories of the coach who looks after his star athlete, right? Make sure that star athlete's doing everything he needs to do so he or she can play in the big game. That was not the case with this kid. The coach was looking after that kid because he was his coach, and that's just what coaches do. And over 5 years of heartache and pulling and pushing, this kid had finally graduated from high school, and literally they couldn't take the family photo unless the coach was in it. And I think that for anybody who out there who is a varsity coach, I mean, you know how you look after your athletes, and you know how you don't look after the kids who are not your athletes. Not because you're not good people, but how many kids can you look after all? You got 600 kids in the high school. I'm the basketball coach. I can't look after 600 kids. I can only look after the 15 who are on my team. But what if you had 15 full-time coaches? Then everybody could look after somebody, and you could literally become a part of that family and hold a kid's hand. Now, granted, our kids need more hand-holding than some others do, but I think that moment where that coach was asked to come into the family picture was the light bulb for a lot of folks who watch what we do to see what that coach really can become.
You know, Jay, last night you talked about how your coaches are not just coaches.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they're psychologists, and they're motivators, and they're cheerleaders, and they're attendance people.
Yep.
I mean, I think that the thing that I see around people in elementary schools or in high schools or in middle schools who are engaging with students is they show that they care about them, and those kids then connect.
Well, it's not a coincidence, right? Our coaches, our teachers, everybody is trained from the youth development perspective first. I think that's one of the things that we talk about a lot with sports, is if you can bring coaches into it through the youth development lens and then add the sport piece afterwards, then you get a nice fundamental sort of youth development approach. And they are calling about attendance, and they are doing some social work, and they're doing all those kinds of things. But that's a full-time job. Like if you ask somebody, look, I need you to do some X's and O's a couple of days a week and then coach on Saturday, that's one job. If you want them to do all the youth development work around it, that's a full-time job.
Yeah, well, I would say that the reason why it's so hard to put this work integrated into schools is that there is no training program to create the teachers that will create these types of schools, which is why after-school programs are easier.
Right.
It's why summer camps are easier. It is much harder, forgetting the budgets involved, because I think we've proven you can do it.
Yep.
It is much harder because just like when John's book first came out, the issue was, how do we change gym teachers into physical educators? And that switch never actually went systemic. In some places it worked, outside in Naperville, Illinois, in places it worked, but it never changed the system of the professional development of the cadre of people who became physical educators.
Right on.
In order to change the entire system, the pathway of the people who would have to be willing to do the work to manifest this type of school, it's enormous.
But it's a chicken and egg, because what if you could change the school system and create a job that doesn't exist? We hire our coaches and they say, I'm gonna have tryouts on Wednesday. And we say, no, you're not. Here's your 20 kids. This is your team, and you're gonna live it and lump it.
Exactly.
So the job that we've created for the coach doesn't exist really anywhere, but if you could create the job, you could create the interest and then train the coach around filling that job. Yep. I mean, I would have done that job for free when I was 25.
The world says outside that there's a dearth of school teachers in general.
Yeah.
We've never had a problem hiring school teachers because the definition of how you present what they get to do for the children is so attractive to them and feeds into their heart of why they actually wanted to be a teacher that they apply.
Right.
And so, I think that we are disruptors, and it's a really fun conversation. Yeah. But for everyone to understand, that's not the system of public education, and it takes a pretty big effort to make it happen, but it can be done.
Yeah, we're noticing that. So on elementary schools during recess, lovely people out there on the recess yard who care about children, but they weren't hired to engage children in physical activity in a place that's what happens there. Yeah. And they're actually hired often to maintain a level of risk or to be the enforcer of discipline. And that's not fun for kids. Yeah. Right? That's not what a recess, that's not what an elementary school
kid should do that themselves, right?
Yeah. And they do. Yeah. When you provide the opportunity for kids to have boundaries within the space, you give them a set of rules that they all agree upon, and that's what they want. Yeah. And then you have a person who is out there saying, okay, let's do this. Yeah. Encouraging them into that space. Kids actually perform beyond their ability, but But the school system is just, unfortunately, they don't take recess or play or sport seriously enough to say we're going to invest in the people who make this possible. And we have schools who come to us and say, can you teach us how to hire our yard supervisors? And we go, sure. Are you willing to actually hire someone who wants to do this type of work? And they go, well, you get people who want to play with kids all the time during recess who work for you year round. I go, yeah, I do, because I tell them that this is what they're actually going to do. They're actually going to be a youth developer. They're going to engage with kids. They're going to make this space an inviting place for kids to be. And because of that, they will return to class ready to learn, happy, motivated, engaged, and ready to come back to school the following day.
One of the best ways perhaps the only way of instituting this kind of change is giving measures, giving statistics, showing the difference in what your kids are doing. So each of you could say a little bit about how you're showing that you're making this kind of change and difference that you all see and experience, but
Sure.
You really have to show numbers to convince people and say, look, it's not just about more seat time. In fact, it's more activity time that brings big change in the social, emotional, and cognitive areas.
Well, now it gets down to money. I would say that it is near impossible for our network of schools to raise the money from funders who are willing to do the real assessment, the persnickety assessment that would allow us to truly measure the 4 to 5 to 6 levels of what movement does for children when it's integrated into schools. The easy answer is public schools are measured very strictly, and in Denver and California, huge amounts of accountability around your testing results. So it's easy to say we knock the tests out of the park and we don't teach to the tests. We do have some money that we've done what we call efficacy study, which basically tests whether anyone's read your book. I'm just going to go there, right? It tests the students to say, what is it that you think you get in this school? And beyond, do you feel safe and secure? I mean, we could go into pieces that are far beyond the scope of what we're talking about up here, but asking, what do you think movement does for you? How do you use that movement? And how do you think that affects you emotionally and cognitively? So we ask for that type of work, so it's anecdotal as well as, crunched data by a university. But to really do the work that we would need to really, throw us into the place that all of you as change makers would walk out to your districts and your funders and say, how come this school is not a choice for our children of this neighborhood, which is of course the call to action. We would need a lot more data, but that is not something that's easily fundable, at least in my experience, running public schools. It's more easily fundable.
What about involving the local universities and colleges?
They do that piece now. But most of them need partner funders. So they're willing to give you a PhD student who's willing to say, this is what I will do. But it never goes deep enough, nor are they around long enough for us to get the longitudinal data that we would need to make the impact to have all that PR and so forth. But obviously we do pretty well because we're here. But it's really not enough. The funding for that is not enough.
What about Playworks? How are you guys measuring, your outcome?
So you go on our website, Stanford Mathematica study, they'll give you all the numbers. Let me tell you what's really happening. So we have principals who are telling us that when children come out of the classroom and they go into a space where they know the rules, there is a values-based process of inclusion and less exclusion, that what happens is there's less conflict, and part of that conflict is was the ball in or was the ball out? And that causes conflict in some way, shape, or form. So what we've done is we've helped schools think through that part, and what principals tell us is they have less children coming into their offices for referrals during recess. It is a consistent, pervasive comment. I have less kids come to my office because of referrals on recess. That also includes a reduction in bullying, a reduction in school climate, conflict. Schools aren't doing a really good job of measuring that, so I can't give you the numbers per school, but the reality is the anecdotal piece is kids go back in the classroom ready to learn, not talking to the teacher about what happened to them on the recess yard.
We're a high school, so graduation rates, college enrollment rates, traditional measurements. We do a ton of non-traditional measurements, attendance, retention, accumulating credits, et cetera. So we're doubling the graduation rates for our students as opposed to what they're doing citywide. Our college enrollment rates are about 2.5 times what they are. But I think so much of what we do and the lens through sports is not really numbers. We had a student last year whose best friend was shot and killed on a Tuesday, and on a Wednesday that kid came to school, which was a miracle in and of itself. The measure of what we do and why it's effective is because that kid spent the entire day just hanging out with his coach. Didn't go to class, didn't study math, we didn't try to get him to do science. He just followed his coach around all day, and that's all he wanted to do, and we were perfectly fine to let him do that. The power of that coach to be a safe place for that kid to be at that moment in time, that's how our school is effective. And yes, the kids are, look, if we were doing that and nobody was graduating, I think we should be closed. Like, I'm not saying it can be all that, but we're doing both.
Yeah, I think once you reduce the problems with discipline in schools that are really challenged, you get kids that are interested then in participating in learning, and this is what we see everywhere. When we begin to have the kids move and exercise and play, we see this drop in disciplinary referrals and an improvement in the classroom and the teachers are happier. The teachers are more motivated because they have students, the teachers don't have to act like policemen.
Yeah.
And they can engage with and the students are more engaged, and therefore then the vaunted test scores and all the other things that everybody looks at as markers of success go up. And so I think you all are really making big changes that we need to support and go forward with. So thank you all for listening to us, and thank my panel for coming here.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you. So important.